Welcome to Max and Stacy Report, coming to you from El Salvador, land of the free, home of the Bitcoin. This week we're looking at the British pound tumble, not unpredictably. Oh boy, Stacy.
Well, El Salvador is actually land of the free, home of the Bitcoin, and home of the burn. President Bukele burned the Bank of England this week as the pound was plummeting by reminding them of what they had tweeted a year ago when they said they were very concerned about El Salvador adopting Bitcoin. So, of course, he tweeted, I told you so, Bank of England. And he was referring back to his November 27th, 2021 tweet, which read, I'm really concerned about Bank of England printing money out of thin air. And the context, as he provided, was Bank of England is worried about El Salvador's adoption of Bitcoin. Really? As he pointed out, they were printing money out of thin air, and they continued to print money. And now we see the plunging pound was down at over 4.5% on Sunday night coming into Monday morning.
Oh, yeah. I love dunking on the Bank of England, and I predicted the pound would crash a few years ago, and of course I was right again. The Bank of England is the source of all fiat money nightmares going back to the 1690s. And they are the mother river, the mother source of all the fiat money catastrophes that we've had. And it's kind of like the Ethereum of fiat money, right? Ethereum is the source of all fiat, of all crypto, of all altcoin nightmares. And the Bank of England is kind of the source of all the troubles in the fiat money world. But Najib Bukele is right to point out that the Bank of England needs to dissolve itself because it has no purpose of use here on planet Earth.
Well, first I'll show everybody in the audience just so you could see the chart, you could see the carnage, you could see the plunge, and see that it was historic. You know, in modern records, this does not exist. Even when George Soros broke the Bank of England, it didn't drop like this. And here you see the plunging pound on coming into Monday morning as markets were opening. And of course, you know, the thing about him burning Bank of England like that is that stiff upper-lipped, academic, sort of elitist thing that voters continuously reject, whether it's in Brexit, whether it's MAGA, whether it's Italy, whether it's, you know, the total support here for Najib Bukele's re-election campaign. What they're saying is they're sick of these people who have ruled over the world, the elite institutions, the academics, the think tanks, all the media that presided over this disaster that left us so fragile. I mean, the plunging pound like that is a sign of fragility. It's a sign that it's all a mirage and it's all could disappear like that. So there was another tweet that happened, and that was with Safety Moose, who was pointing out that Paul Krugman, of course, Nobel economist, right? The sort of guy we're told over and over to listen to him because he's an expert, even though we, the people, can point to when he got it horribly, embarrassingly wrong about the internet, when he said the internet would just be a fad, it would be no more important than the facts. And then Safety Moose, he tweeted a reminder from just 2 days before the pound plunge. Just 2 days before, he tweeted, quoting Paul Krugman, he said, I did invent the academic field. And he was referring to Paul Krugman's tweet. But back to sterling, pound sterling, the British pound, I'm supposed to know something about currency crisis. I did invent the academic field. And as far as I know, there are two ways a country with a floating exchange rate can have a currency crisis, neither of which seems to apply to the UK. So the experts said what happened coming into the beginning of this week, yesterday, Monday morning, was not supposed to happen because they could print money as they wish.
Right. This is a recurring theme. Paul Krugman we've visited his career many times. He's been dead wrong always. He espouses a philosophical, a Keynesian economics model that has as much a failure as communism or socialism has been a failure. And all the academics, the Steve Henke, I think his name is, he's been spouting falsehoods now for years. And why does this all happen? Why do we have a government and a central bank that seems to relish being wrong and causing untold misery, because whenever they make a mistake, they can print money to cover it. Everybody else who's not printing money for themselves has to work for a living. And if you work and you make a living and you have a family, and then you watch politicians, you watch Paul Krugman, you watch Steve Hanke, you watch the Jay Powell, you watch the Bank of England. I mean, England's not even, it's not even anywhere near a democracy. It's an outright autocratic, supreme, ruled by a monarch. On display, we just saw the festivities that went on there, and that harsh monarchy of lies, and they just print money. That's all they do. When they make a mistake, they print money to cover the mistake. And that's what Bitcoin fixes, and that's what El Salvador understands. That's why the president can basically thumb his nose at the Bank of England and openly troll them, and the IMF, and Christine Lagarde, and Jay Powell, because he's got Bitcoin as legal tender. They're just fluffers. They're fluffers on a porn set. They don't know jack nothing about nothing. They just print, print, print. That's why they're going to win here. You know, even the Stargo knows that. Even the bird knows it. This is the place of the winning. Bitcoin is the grenade. Fiat money is gone.
It's the Torgos, just so you know.
What did I say?
Targo?
Torgos?
I don't know. But, you know, speaking of the change in regime that has happened in the UK over the past week or two, not only is the death of the British pound, which started, 100 years ago, is now accelerating in this parabolic end stage. But of course, we've seen the change of monarchy from Queen Elizabeth to King Charles. We've seen the shift of power from the premiership, from the prime minister, from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss. But there's been a regime change, as it's called by Mohammed Al-Arian, the former head of PIMCO, which is a $1 trillion bond fund. He's calling the moves in the Treasury market disorderly. But first, I want to show you some of the data of just how disorderly this has been, because this has been a recurring theme on all of our content going back nearly 20 years at this point, is everybody has called the death of the bond market. The bond market has been in a raging bull market for 40-something years, and everybody has called that this mother of all bubbles was going to pop. They said it 15 years ago, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, 9 years ago. They keep calling it. And of course, that the bond apocalypse is going to come, and it never came. Well, it looks like it's here now. And this is a chart. First, we're going to look at 46 years of data and the bond markets in that 46 years. So anybody out there watching this show, for the most part, they will not have actually lived as an adult through this sort of situation. And that is bond market carnage update. And this was from a week ago before it even got worse. And the total return of the Bloomberg Global Aggregate Index made a new low for the year today. It is now down 16.93% year to date. How stunning is this? The S&P 500, which is having an extraordinarily bad year, is down 17.5% year to date. So you can see the 46 years of lines there. We're way worse right now than it was there. And I know you have talked about the 1994 bond market sell-off, and that was only down 3%, and it caused global chaos. And this is down 17%.
Right, the bond market is the foundation of the global financialized economy, and it is crashing after many years of abuse. It's a question of what I would call financial incest. The central bankers, instead of allowing price signal to inform them about which way bonds are going, they breed derivatives with other derivatives incestuously to create incestuous derivatives that refer to themselves and give price signals that tell the market makers in the market bad information, and they go long bonds year after year for more than a decade, even though the underlying fundamentals have deteriorated to absolute garbage. And now that garbage has floated to the surface, and everyone is saying, oh my God, we live in a world of risk that we never thought possible because Paul Krugman never told us about the risk because he's on the payroll to lie. And oh my God, now the market is reflecting that risk. Oh, now what do we do? Well, what you do, if you're smart, is you buy some Bitcoin, because every single piece of paper is going to zero against Bitcoin.
Right. And now I mentioned Mohammed Al-Arian, who was the former head of PIMCO. He's now like a professor at all these prestigious universities, part of the academia and stuff like that. But nevertheless, he knows the bond market. He's been in the pits there of trading. He's not just an academic like Paul Krugman. He's a guy who actually was a trader of bonds and knows the bond market. So he called this like there's a regime change happening in the bond market, that there's a shift in liquidity, that there's no liquidity anymore and it's drying up, and things have changed radically. So he, however, in this tweet where he talks about this, he provides this link that I'm going to read you, and that's a quote from Peter Bukvar. Bottom line, all of those years of central bank interest rate suppression, poof, gone, said Peter Bukvar, Chief Investment Officer at Bleakley Advisory Group. These bonds are trading like emerging market bonds, and the biggest financial bubble in the history of bubbles, that of sovereign bonds, continues to deflate. So this is going to be, I believe, a theme of Max and Stacy Report going forward, because the deflation of this greatest bubble in history of financial markets is going to be just one word, and that's spectacular.
Right. Well, regime change, I think is also what he's referring to there is the economy is moving from being consumer-led to producer-led. And the consumers have had low interest rates and artificially low access to credit for decades, and it created this huge bubble. Now the bubble's popped, and now the price discovery is moving over to the producers of commodities over more in the East. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, much more coming your way.
Are you interested in Bitcoin but don't know where to start? Fold is the easiest and most fun way to earn Bitcoin on everything you do. The Daily Wheel is free for everyone. You just open the app and spin for free Bitcoin. Seriously, there's no catch. And get the free Fold card to earn Bitcoin back on every purchase. Download the Fold app and get started today.
Welcome back to Max and Stacy Report. Time now to go to Parker Lewis from Unchained Capital in Austin, Texas. Parker, nice to see you again.
Good to be back, Max. Good to see you guys.
So, Parker, we've got a lot of energy FUD about Bitcoin and its energy use. I see that Greenpeace has spent $1 million on this big ad campaign. Change the code. They want people to think about changing Bitcoin's code from proof of work to proof of stake. What about it, Parker? Is this a good idea? Should we change the code?
I do not think that we should change the code, and I don't think that we can change the code, more importantly, Max. Bitcoin's a consensus mechanism, and everybody has to adapt around Bitcoin, and that's just the way that the world works now.
Parker, you're in the state of Texas. We've got a lot of chatter on the federal level. Senators like Elizabeth Warren want states like Texas and Wyoming to ban Bitcoin mining. Is this a good idea?
I think one of the big jokes here in the state of Texas, Max, is that Massachusetts contributes less than 1% of the power in the United States, and Texas produces 24% of the power in the United States. I think that as a state, we in Texas have clearly demonstrated in more ways than one that energy is very important to our economy. And at a state level as well, the legislature has taken actions specifically to protect our energy industry. And because Bitcoin is really built on the foundation of energy, that is really what makes Bitcoin, in addition to being sound money, so strategic to the state of Texas. Energy is strategic to the state of Texas. Energy is strategic to Bitcoin, and therefore Bitcoin is strategic to the state of Texas. And I think when you get down to the brass tacks of a Bitcoin transaction, it is not between two people. It's between the Bitcoin network and a miner. And in my view, that's not a interstate transaction. And so for a number of reasons, I do not worry, and I think that there will be every incentive in states like Texas and in Wyoming to preserve that self-interest and energy being strategic. That all incentives align between states that are big energy producers and the Bitcoin network, and I think that that we'll see that increasingly, and it might potentially be a state versus federal government rights, but economic incentives and energy will win at the end of the day.
In El Salvador, which is the land of stranded energy, a lot of volcanoes here, a lot of potential for geothermal energy. And tell us about how Bitcoin fixes this.
Yeah, I think that that's a big point. I think that from a lot of the time that I've spent down in Houston, which really is the energy capital of the world, I've started over the last 18 months to really go down the energy rabbit hole. And for people that have gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, going down the energy rabbit hole is a whole other side. And these two stories are very interconnected. I think that there's two sides of it. There's ways that Bitcoin can help energy grids, and then there's also ways that Bitcoin can help tap and capture stranded and otherwise uneconomic energy. And so whether that's geothermal underneath, or generated from volcanoes in El Salvador or Nicaragua, or whether it's stranded natural gas in the state of Texas, that all of those sources represent powers that power or underlying sources of energy that can be converted into power that otherwise were not economical. And what that means is there was not otherwise an incentive to develop natural resources. And what Bitcoin provides in the case of stranded energy is an economic incentive to develop and produce power and for the benefit of that local economic system and the ability to sell it to the Bitcoin network. Basically, there now exists an incentive to develop natural resources, again, geothermal in El Salvador, stranded natural gas in Texas or anywhere realistically, and to be able to export that energy resource to the rest of the world via communication channel. And that is profound, and it will have massive and beautiful benefits for places that previously did not or could not tap into their own resources.
Parker, the largest shitcoin, Ethereum, has recently merged and gone from being proof of work to being proof of stake. Can you explain fundamentally what's the difference between these two?
So the way that I think about proof of work, and there's a lot of puzzle pieces within Bitcoin that allow it to credibly enforce its fixed supply of 21 million without the need for trust. That can only happen on a decentralized basis, and it can only happen via the proof of work function. Again, not singularly, but that proof of work function is a really critical piece. I like to tell people that the only reason that Bitcoin has value is because it can issue and settle currency on a decentralized basis without the need for trust. And if that is Bitcoin's primary value proposition, and if proof of work is core to that, then what that means in aggregate is that proof of work was critical in delivering to the entire world on a permissionless basis a form of money that can't be printed. And that is of profound value and profound implication. And part of how it does that is it separates out the validation and issuance of currency from ownership, very importantly. And that separation, there are nodes in Bitcoin that also have a validating function, but the mining function and specifically proof of work separate ownership from validation, such that if you own 0.1 Bitcoin or 1 Bitcoin or 1,000 Bitcoin, you are equal under the quote law of Bitcoin or the consensus rules. All of those transactions are the same. And the people that control the majority of the economic value cannot have outsized influence on smaller members of the network or people that have less savings. The proof of work system basically unsolves that previously solved problem. And in Bitcoin, and it's not say all because it is a profound innovation, what it functionally does is the thing of value is its fixed supply. And if we've solved that, or if the system works, that the best that any other system could do would be to match it. But more realistically, if that problem's already been solved, and if Bitcoin is permissionless, which it is, and if it is decentralized, and if it's global, then all of the world can opt into a currency system that performs the very best function, which is simply affording the world with a form of money that can't be printed. Proof of stake was obsoleted before it even was envisioned. But more importantly, in that case of that largest shitcoin altcoin, is that it basically had a non-backward compatible hard fork, which just demonstrates that it's a shitcoin and that it's centralized. But we already had Bitcoin, and the rest of the world's just figuring it out.
Right. Well, proof of stake, I mean, you could argue that for thousands of years, the system was proof of stake. And Bitcoin came along to solve the problem of proof of stake, and everything inherently wrong with proof of stake was something new called proof of work. So this idea of going back to proof of stake is you're going back to a system that we know didn't work, Parker.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. JP Morgan, proof of stake, Deutsche Bank, proof of stake, our central bank, BOJ, ECB, Fed, proof of stake. Think about if you remove proof of work from Bitcoin, you just have nodes. It would functionally, those nodes become irrelevant without a system to prove something that can't be faked, which is energy, right? That there's energy all over the world, and producing power, you can optimize to produce power better, but you can't fake it. And Bitcoin was designed purposefully to create a system that would separate out validation from ownership of the network. And if you go back to a system where, would we want a system? Would we want a system where if you have 2,000 Bitcoins that you have greater rights within the network than someone that has 0.1 Bitcoin? No, we have a system where the rich and the wealthy and the powerful are advantage over the poor people. We don't want to recreate that system. And more importantly, Bitcoin's already out in the world. Everybody else has to deal with it. Proof of work works. The incentives to adopt a form of money that can't be printed. And the very important word that I use is credibly. Credibly enforce a fixed supply without the need for trust. If I copied Bitcoin and said, hey, it's only going to have 21 million, it wouldn't have those sub properties because I couldn't credibly represent to people in a way that they don't have to rely on trust. And because Bitcoin already exists, everyone else is always going to have this opportunity, A versus B. Bitcoin's always going to be more decentralized. It is today. It's getting more and more decentralized. And no one wants to opt back into a system that was broken. And so it's somewhere between a Rube Goldberg machine and just a scam to get people's Bitcoin.
All right, so now you have the CBDC, central bank digital currencies, being launched. Seemingly they're going to hook up and ally with the proof of stake crowd. And so this is the battle lines are being drawn between proof of stake, CBDC on one side, and proof of work and Bitcoin on the other. How does this play out?
So CBDC's proof of stake, a CBDC is functionally a system that is a proof of stake system, just as Ethereum is or any other currency that goes over to that. Ultimately, and I think one of the things that Senator Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming has been great about is basically calling out ESG, all of the things around that would be the same economic incentives of proof of stake, is that it's all actually about power, right? Power and control. And so I think that CBDCs, and one of the more remarkable things, Max, that I saw, and I don't know if you guys saw this, but Neil Kashkari, who's the Fed president of Minneapolis, came out and basically was like, why would the American people want a CBDC? Like, yes, could I have mass surveillance over all the American people? Yes, could I? He basically pointed out all of the potential negatives of a CBDC and said, like, I can understand why, the People's Bank of China might want this, or the CCP, but why would the American people want that? And so I thought it was really remarkable that someone who I otherwise look at as Neil Kashkari with so much, distaste for printing money and destroying our wealth, seem to cut really at the heart of this issue. And so I do think that there is going to be an alliance between the central bank crowd, the CBDC crowd, at least the ones that are proponents of it, the proof of stake, because in Bitcoin, what they have to cede functionally is control and power, and that it's put back in the hands of the people, or realistically anybody who is saving their money in Bitcoin and in the Bitcoin network, because the only thing that is afforded to those people is that nobody can debase or strip away the value of their savings. And when you strip away power from people, whether it's ESG people, whether it's central bankers, whether it's proof of stake people that are just trying to scam you out of your Bitcoin, that ultimately there are economic incentives around powerful interests, and the people that adopt Bitcoin, and it is a force as strong as gravity, do so in a very humble way, or a way with a great degree of humility, which is, I will opt into this system that I do not control because I know that nobody else controls it. And that sound money has such great incentive mechanisms that there is a saying in Bitcoin, which is everything is good for Bitcoin. The more that people try to fight Bitcoin, and the more that these kleptocrats or proof of stake pushers try to draw down or kind of claim that there are bad things to the environment that have to do with Bitcoin's proof of work system, they will ultimately fail, because everything is good for Bitcoin, and because the economic incentives align between 8 billion people to simply have a form of money that can't be printed is so great.
Here in El Salvador, the president has embraced Bitcoin only and is adhering to a policy framework of economic sovereignty. What are your thoughts for the future of such a country?
You guys are doing a great job. I thought about last week when you guys reached out, I thought about maybe should I fly down there and do this in person. I haven't yet been. I do spend a lot of time in maybe not a neighbor, but a close neighbor in Nicaragua. And I think that countries that embrace Bitcoin, they will prosper far more than countries that do not. And that one of the things that Bitcoin represents is the most mobile form of, I really actually hate this definition when people use it in the macro sense, when they talk about how mobile capital is. But Bitcoin is this form of money that is digital in nature, but that is finitely scarce. And if you envision someone leaving some country like China or India and bringing their gold with them, and there's only a maximum amount of gold that you could carry on your person, on a flight, and there's a lot of people that might sit at a border and restrict you from doing that. But if you're living in a country that disrespects or does not allow you to freely transact in Bitcoin, you have the ability to take all of your Bitcoin and get on a plane and take your economic value, take your finitely scarce asset that is also finitely scarce for the world, and help coordinate activities with that in a region like El Salvador that is more friendly and more open to it. And I think that given this nature of Bitcoin, and given that it allows you to truly be mobile in a way that you hadn't been before, that people are going to regulatory shop in ways that they previously could not. And so I think that that reality, and that the fact that civilization is really built around sound money, that places like El Salvador will do really well. I also have to say that there is this trust but verify, but the things that they are doing in El Salvador over the period of time, it wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just the fact that they announced that Bitcoin was legal tender. One of the things that I noticed particularly, and I point out to politicians, whether it's in the state of Texas or in the United States federal government, their bill actually made it far more simple by actually saying Bitcoin. All these people, whether it was in Wyoming or wherever, they all tried to describe Bitcoin and saying digital assets, and they tried to describe something that's similar to it. And it actually becomes much more simple when you just say the word Bitcoin. And it isn't so complicated as having to get into cryptography and forks, as the world knows what Bitcoin is, what is commonly referred to as Bitcoin, what is Bitcoin and what is not Bitcoin. And by actually just saying the word Bitcoin in legislation, they created a template for the rest of the world to model. And then since then, whether it's kind of doing the R&D, which I think you may have mentioned before, on the geothermal in El Salvador and building a Bitcoin mine, having support for programs. I know that there was a college diploma, I don't know how, or not college, high school diploma of like teaching Bitcoin education. A couple of our team members, David and Tyler, flew down to El Salvador. I believe it was an IBEX or EBEX program where they were teaching people actually how to use Bitcoin hardware wallets. They don't do that stuff in the United States. So it wasn't just that they announced it, it's a lot of the follow through that people are seeing from afar. And I imagine that a lot of Bitcoiners will take their finitely scarce asset in countries, jurisdictions where Bitcoin is less freely adoptable and being able to use and transacted, and go to places like El Salvador and others that embrace it.
Parker Lewis, thanks so much for being on Max and Stacy Report.
Nice to see you guys. Thanks for having me back on.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Max and Stacy Report. Want to thank our special guest, Parker Lewis. Until next time, remember, coming to you from El Salvador, land of the free, home of the Bitcoin.